Her stepfather sold her. She walked into a room full of criminals and knelt before the most dangerous one. This is what happened next. She knelt at the feet of the most dangerous man in the room, and she was smiling 3 hours earlier. Isla Voss had been running for her life through the frozen streets of Reykjavik, Iceland. Her heels were gone, lost somewhere between the docks and the narrow cobblestone alley where she'd hidden for 20 minutes listening to her stepfather's men search for her. Her feet were bleeding. Her silk dress, the one her stepmother had chosen specifically because it made her look like cargo rather than a person, was torn at the hem. She had no phone, no money, no passport. What she did have was a name. Asterisk the Grand Glacier Summit. Tonight, the old harbor warehouse. Asterisk she'd overheard her stepfather Marcus whispering it to his bodyguard 3 days ago, before she understood what it meant. Before she understood that Marcus hadn't brought her to Iceland for a family trip. He'd brought her here to sell her, not in any way that would ever appear in a legal document. Marcus was too smart for that. He'd simply arranged for her to disappear in a foreign country, far from the lawyers and courts that were currently processing her late mother's will. A will that left everything, every company, every property, every asset of the Voss empire to Isla. Without Isla, Marcus got everything. It was elegant, really. She almost admired it, asterisk almost, asterisk she ran toward the harbor. The warehouse from the outside looked abandoned. Inside, it was something else entirely. Isla had expected criminals. She had not expected this, a gathering that looked more like a summit between world leaders than anything she'd imagined. Long tables, expensive suits, security that made government protection look casual. Men from every corner of the world, speaking in 6 different languages, conducting business over whiskey that cost more per bottle than her former apartment. She understood immediately that she had walked into something far beyond her stepfather's small operation. She also understood, from the way 2 very large men immediately grabbed her arms, that she was not supposed to be here. Go of me, lost, sweetheart. Laughter rippled through the nearest group of men, and then she saw him. He was standing slightly apart from the others the way powerful things often are, not because he was excluded but because everything else naturally orbited him. Tall, dark suit, no tie, the top button open like formality was something that applied to other people. Dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been carved specifically to make people uncomfortable. Eyes that were doing a slow, uninterested scan of the room until they landed on her and stopped, not with interest. Flat assessment of someone cataloging a minor inconvenience. Please. Isla twisted against the men holding her arms and looked directly at him. She didn't know why she chose him. Something animal, something instinctive. The same way a drowning person reaches for the largest thing in the water, even if it might be a shark. Please help me. Silence that followed was complete. The man looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked away. My problem, he said. The room exploded with laughter. Asking a monster for help. One man wheezed, slapping the table. Girl, do you know who that is? That's Cale Maddox, another said, grinning at her obvious confusion. He doesn't do charity, he doesn't do mercy. And he definitely doesn't do damsels. Cale Maddox didn't react to any of this. He picked up his glass, took a slow sip, and continued ignoring her as the men dragged her toward a side room. Isla went, but she was already thinking the side room was where they kept the women. Isla counted 11 others, various ages, various levels of fear. Some had clearly been here before and had learned stillness as survival. Others were newer, their terror fresh and close to the surface. An older woman with careful eyes met Isla's gaze across the room and shook her head slightly. Asterisk, don't make noise. Don't draw attention. Asterisk, Isla sat. She thought about Marcus, back in his hotel suite right now, probably having dinner, probably already spending her inheritance in his head. She thought about her mother, Elena Voss, who had built an empire from nothing, who had looked at Isla on her deathbed and said, I made sure it would all go to you. Don't let anyone take it. Asterisk, she thought about Cale Maddox and the way he had dismissed her without blinking. And then she thought about what the laughing men had said. Asterisk, he doesn't do charity. He doesn't do mercy. Asterisk, what did he do then? She'd been in this world long enough, grown up on the edges of her mother's business long enough. to know that men like the ones in that room operated on a single currency, power. And Cale Maddox had more of it than anyone else here. She'd seen it in the way the room shifted when she'd spoken to him. The way even the men who laughed had glanced at him first, checking, like they needed to make sure it was safe to find this funny. He was the apex of this particular food chain, which meant that if she could somehow get his attention, his real attention, she had a chance. Asterisk, not with fear, not with begging. You already tried that. Asterisk, she needed to be interesting to him. She needed to be something he'd never seen before in a room like this when the men came to bring the women out, presenting them. Isla realized with cold fury, like gifts at a very dark party she watched. She watched the other men accept the offerings with varying degrees of enthusiasm. She watched Cale Maddox wave them away without looking up from the contract he was reviewing. The man offering gave a small, apologetic shrug to his colleague. Asterisk, he doesn't want women. Asterisk, and yet here she was with absolutely nothing else to offer. The men were laughing again. One of them, heavy-set Russian accent, enjoying himself too much, leaned back in his chair and called out, "Maddox. The girl who begged you earlier is staring at you." Cale didn't look up from his papers. "Then she should stop. One, you should take her. She's been staring for 10 minutes. Then she should find something more interesting to look at." Isla, who had in fact been staring at him for 10 minutes, made her decision. She crossed the room. Every conversation stopped. Even the Russian went quiet. Several hands moved toward weapons out of pure reflex. Isla ignored all of it. She walked to where Cale Maddox sat at the head of the table, reviewing his papers. Apparently unaware that she existed, she knelt, not the desperate, scrambling kneel of someone begging. She went down slowly, deliberately, the torn silk of her dress pooling on the stone floor, her spine straight, her chin up, like it was a choice. Like she was the one with power in this moment and had simply decided to put herself here. She looked up at him. He was looking back. Finally. His dark eyes on her face with an expression she couldn't read, the Russian broke the silence. "Is she looking for death?" "Almost certainly," someone else said. Cale Maddox looked at her for a long moment. Then, unhurried, he reached out. His hand found her hair. She forced herself not to flinch, and he ran his fingers through it once, like she was a cat that had wandered to his feet. "You chose me," he said. It wasn't a question. Isla held his gaze. "Yes." "Why?" "Because everyone else in this room is afraid of you." She kept her voice steady. "Which means you're the only one here who doesn't need to prove anything." Something moved in his eyes. Quick. Gone. He pulled his hand away, leaned back. "Trying to seduce me won't work." "Not trying to seduce you." "Then what are you doing, choosing the safest predator in the room?" Silence was different now, less amused, more uncertain. The Russian cleared his throat. "You know what? Let's make this interesting." He looked around the table with the grin of a man who enjoyed watching things burn. "A game. The girl tries to win Maddox over. If she manages it," he spread his hands. "We let her walk free." Laughter again, the confident laughter of men who considered this impossible. "And if she doesn't?" Cale asked. His voice was bored. He was looking at his papers again. "Then she stays. Simple." The Russian smiled at Isla. "What do you say, girl? You already chose him. Now win him." Isla looked at Cale Maddox. At the closed, cold face of a man who had dismissed her once already, who was currently pretending to read a contract while an entire room waited, she thought of her mother, of everything that was hers by right, of Marcus eating dinner in his hotel suite. "All right," she said. She stood, smoothing her ruined dress with quiet dignity. "I'll play." Cale's eyes flicked up. Just once, just briefly, but she saw it. Asterisk, he's curious. Asterisk, good. Curious was something she could work with. She met his gaze and said, very quietly, just for him, "I'm not going to seduce you, Mr. Maddox. I'm going to make you choose me. There's a difference." His expression didn't change. But he didn't look away either. Cale Maddox did not think about the girl. That was what he told himself at 2 a.m. when he was still awake in his hotel suite, reviewing contracts that had held his complete attention every other night of his adult life. He did not think about the way she knelt like it was a throne she was choosing rather than a floor. He did not think about the steadiness of her eyes when everyone else in that room would have been shaking. He did not think about what she'd said. Asterisk, "I'm not going to seduce you. I'm going to make you choose me." Asterisk, he set down his pen, rolled his neck, picked the pen back up. His second-in-command, Dante, appeared in the doorway in that silent way he had that most people found unnerving. Kale had stopped noticing it 15 years ago. Girl, Dante said. What about her? Petrov's men have her in the East Wing. She hasn't eaten. She refused the food they brought. Dante paused. She asked for a book. Kale looked up. A book. Specifically, she asked for anything by Dostoevsky. When they laughed at her, she said she'd take a newspaper. When they laughed at that too, she said she'd take the shipping manifest from the dock office if that was all they had. Dante's expression was carefully neutral. Petrov thinks she's crazy. Petrov thinks anyone who reads is crazy. Kale looked back at his papers. Get her the book. A pause. Which one? Whichever one she wants. Dante left without comment. He was very good at that. Kale stared at his contract. Asterisk, who are you? Asterisk, he thought. And why are you not afraid of me? Asterisk, Kyla read until the early hours of the morning. The book had appeared outside her door, slid under. No explanation, no indication of who had sent it. A worn paperback copy of the brothers Karamazov asterisk. She'd pressed it against her chest for a moment before opening it, feeling something embarrassingly close to gratitude. Then she'd reminded herself that gratitude was a weakness she couldn't afford right now. She read, she thought, she planned. The game the Russian had proposed was simple on the surface and impossible underneath. Seduce a man who didn't want to be seduced. Win over someone who had built his entire existence on being unwinnable. Every other woman in that room would have approached it the obvious way. Beauty, flirtation, the tools that had always worked on powerful men. Isla had seen those tools fail on Kale Maddox in real time. He'd waved away women without even looking at them. So she would not be a woman he could wave away. She would be a problem he couldn't stop thinking about. She was already most of the way there. Morning came gray and cold. Iceland doing what Iceland did in November. When they brought her to the main hall, the summit was already in session. The long tables were covered in maps and documents. Arguments in multiple languages crossed each other in the air. Kale was at the head of it all, listening more than speaking, which told her everything about how he operated. The most dangerous person in any room was never the loudest. The Russian Petrov, she'd learned his name, grinned when he saw her. Our little player returns. Ready to try your luck today? Good morning, Isla said pleasantly, as if they were at a business conference. She found an empty chair at the far end of the table, pulled it out and sat down, every head turned. What are you doing? One of the men asked, sitting. She looked at the nearest stack of documents, shipping manifests, she realized, numbers and ports and dates. May I? Those are confidential, yes. She folded her hands on the table. I won't touch them. I was just going to suggest that your projection for the northern route is off by about 3 weeks given the ice shelf data from this past quarter, but it's not my operation. Silence. Petrov stared at her. How do you know about ice shelf data? My mother's company operated Arctic shipping routes for 11 years. Isla kept her voice conversational. Before she died and my stepfather attempted to steal her company, which is actually why I'm here if anyone is interested in the full story. Nobody spoke. She was very careful not to look at Kale Maddox. She could feel him looking at her. The northern route, said a German man with reading glasses and the careful expression of someone who actually cared about logistics. You said 3 weeks off, minimum. The Barents Sea corridor has shifted significantly. If your timeline is built on data older than 6 months, you'll hit ice you're not equipped for. She glanced at the manifest she hadn't touched. Page 4, third column. Those tonnage estimates assume open water that doesn't exist anymore. German reached for page 4. Turned to the third column, looked up at his colleague with an expression that confirmed everything she'd said. Petrov laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh now, uncertain around the edges. Where did they find this girl? She found us, Kale said. His voice was the same as always, flat, calm, bored, but it was the first time he'd acknowledged her existence since last night. Isla allowed herself one small internal victory and kept her face completely still. The day became strange. They didn't send her back to the East Wing. Nobody explicitly said she could stay, but nobody removed her either, and Isla understood that in rooms like this, the absence of a no was its own kind of permission. She didn't flirt, didn't perform, didn't try to position herself near Kale or engineer moments of accidental proximity. She simply sat at the end of the table, and occasionally, when she knew something useful, said it. The ice shelf data had been the opening. After that, when a disagreement broke out about Mediterranean port access, she mentioned her mother's former business partner who controlled 3 private docks in Valletta. When 2 men got into a heated argument about a legal matter involving asset transfer across 3 jurisdictions, she quietly recited the relevant statute from memory, having spent 2 years studying law before switching to business. She wasn't performing competence. She simply had it, and she let them see it. By afternoon, the German, whose name was Werner, was directing questions at her end of the table. By evening, Petrov had stopped laughing, and Cale Maddox had moved his chair. Not much. 3 feet, maybe. But he was closer to her end of the table than he'd been that morning, and Isla noticed, even though she pretended not to. It was after dinner, a meal she ate at the table because no one stopped her when he spoke to her directly for the first time. The others had dispersed into smaller conversations and card games and whatever else men like this did with their evenings. Isla was sitting alone, the Dostoevsky open in front of her, when the chair across from her was pulled out and Cale sat down. She turned a page. "Mr. Maddox, you're not reading," he said. "I'm pretending to read so that people leave me alone." She looked up. It was working until now. Corner of his mouth moved, the smallest possible movement. "Who are you?" "I told you. I chose you." "That's not an answer. It's the most relevant answer to your situation." She closed the book. "You're trying to decide if I'm a plant, if someone sent me here to get close to you, if this whole performance is engineered. I came here with no shoes, a torn dress, and bleeding feet. If someone engineered this, they should be fired." She met his eyes. "My name is Isla Voss. My mother was Elena Voss. She built the Arctic Corridor shipping network from nothing over 20 years. She died 14 months ago and left everything to me. My stepfather Marcus has spent those 14 months trying to make me disappear so he can inherit instead." She paused. "He succeeded in getting me here. He hasn't succeeded in the disappearing part yet." Cale was quiet for a moment. "Elena Voss, you've heard of her. Everyone in that room has heard of her. She was formidable." Something warm moved through Isla's chest at the word. "Yes, she was." His eyes moved over her face in that cataloging way. "You memorized Arctic shipping data. You know maritime law. You can read a room full of men who would terrify most people and find the pressure points within an hour. Taught me everything she knew. She said I would need it." Was right. He leaned back. "What do you want from me, Isla Voss?" It was the first time he'd used her name. She kept her voice level. "I want out of Iceland. I want to get back to London before the probate hearing on March 15th, which is the date Marcus needs me to be absent for or his claim on the estate fails. I want to keep what my mother built." She held his gaze. "And I think you can help me do all 3. Would I? Because I'm useful. You saw that today." She tilted her head. "Werner asked me 4 questions this afternoon. You answered none of the ones directed at you and still controlled the entire room. We operate similarly. The difference is I'm currently without resources and you have more than you know what to do with. You're proposing a trade, proposing a partnership, short-term, mutually beneficial." She didn't look away. "You help me get home. I give you the Valletta dock contact, the ice shelf analysis your northern operation clearly needs, and whatever else I know that's useful. And I know quite a lot." Cale said nothing. The fire crackled in the massive hearth. Outside, Icelandic wind threw itself against the warehouse windows. "The game," he said finally. "Petrov will expect you to fulfill the terms. I know. You agreed to win me over. I know. You think this conversation is how you do that." His voice was unreadable. Not flirtation, not beauty, information and usefulness. "I think," Isla said quietly, "that you have spent a very long time in rooms full of people offering you things you don't want. I'm offering you something different." "Which is?" She looked at him, really looked. At the closed face and the careful eyes and the man who had inexplicably sent her a book in the middle of the night when he could have simply let her sit in an empty room. "Someone who doesn't need anything from you except one specific thing," she said. "No loyalty, no emotion, no complication. Just help me get home and I'll make it worth your while." Cale Maddox looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do once in the past 24 hours. He smiled. It was small and cold and probably terrifying to most people. To Isla it felt like winning. "Going to be a problem," he said, "almost certainly. I don't like problems." "You don't like easy things," she corrected. "There's a difference." He stood, buttoned his jacket, looked down at her with that flat, dark gaze that she was beginning to suspect hid considerably more than it showed. "Get some sleep, Isla Voss," he said. "Tomorrow I'll get you out of here. Like that, you made a good argument." He picked up her book, glanced at the spine, set it back down. Anyone who reads Dostoevsky in a hostage situation has earned at least one favor. He walked away. Isla watched him go. Then she pressed her hand flat on the table and let herself breathe for the first time in 2 days. She wasn't safe yet. Not even close, but she had him. And something told her, something warm and inconvenient and entirely unwelcome, that getting home was no longer the most complicated thing about this situation. Getting out of Iceland was supposed to be simple. It was not simple. Kale had a plan. He always had a plan. At 4 a.m. they would leave through the service entrance. Dante had arranged a car. A private airstrip 40 minutes outside Reykjavik had a plane waiting. By morning, Isla would be in London, clean, fast, no complications. 3:47 a.m. Petrov's men discovered she was missing from the east wing. "Go," Kale said to Dante, his voice completely level as the sound of shouting erupted somewhere behind them in the warehouse. He put his hand on Isla's back and moved her forward through the dark corridor. "Faster. I thought you had a plan," Isla said, matching his pace without complaint, barefoot again because heels were impossible and she'd abandoned them without a word. "Do have a plan. The plan appears to be on fire." Plans catch fire eventually. The point is what you do next. They came out through a loading dock into the Icelandic night. The cold hit like a wall, the brutal, indifferent cold of a country that didn't particularly care if you survived it. Isla made no sound, just pulled the coat Kale had given her tighter and kept moving. The car was there. Dante was already in the driver's seat. They were 30 seconds from inside when the lights came on. 4 vehicles. Petrov's men moving fast from the eastern side of the building. Maddox. Petrov's voice carried across the frozen ground, more amused than angry. "You're leaving early. I have a flight with my property." "She's not your property." Kale's voice was still calm. Everything about him was always still. Isla stood just behind his shoulder and watched him face down 4 armed vehicles without adjusting his posture by a single degree. She walked in. No one owned her coming in. No one owns her going out. Agreed to the game, she played the game. Kale tilted his head. "She won." Silence. "She didn't seduce you," Petrov said. "No." Kale glanced back at Isla and something in his expression was different from anything she'd seen in the past 2 days. "She did something more difficult." He looked back at Petrov. "She made me choose her, those were the terms." Petrov stared at him for a long moment, then he laughed. Genuine this time, surprised out of him. "You're serious." "I'm always serious." Another long pause. The armed men looked at each other, then at Petrov, waiting. Petrov waved his hand. The vehicle's lights dimmed. "Fine, Maddox, take her." He shook his head, still laughing. "First time in 20 years I've seen you admit someone got under your skin." "I said she won a game. Don't make it a poem, Petrov." More laughter. The men stood down. Kale turned to Isla and said simply, "Get in the car." She got in the car. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, the black Icelandic landscape rolling past the window, the sky beginning its slow gray suggestion of dawn. Isla sat with her hands in her lap and thought about what he'd said. "She made me choose her." "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "Do what?" "Petrov, I won." "You could have said you were taking me as a business decision, a trade, something that didn't." She stopped. "Something that didn't make it personal," Kale finished. "Yes." He was looking out the window. "Would you have preferred that?" Isla considered being dishonest, decided against it. "No." "Then stop thanking me for it." "I wasn't thanking you. You were about to." She almost smiled. "You're very annoying, I've been told." Dante in the front seat said nothing. He had the particular stillness of someone who had learned very well how to be invisible. "When we land in London," Isla said, "I'll get you the Valletta contact within 24 hours. The ice shelf analysis will take me a few days to compile properly, but I can send preliminary data." "Stop." She looked at him. Kale had turned from the window. His dark eyes were on her face with that same unreadable expression that she'd spent 2 days trying to decode. "We can discuss the terms later. I want to be clear that this is a transaction. I know what you want it to be, then, and I know what it actually is." His voice was quiet, final, not unkind. "You've been managing this from the moment you knelt on that floor. Every word calculated, every move designed." He paused. "You're very good at it. My mother taught me. To survive, yes, I know." He looked at her. She taught you to turn everything into a transaction so that nothing could be taken from you that you hadn't already agreed to give. Accuracy of it hit her somewhere unprotected. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what? Don't read me like that." "Not because I can't." She stopped, looked out her window at the dark, rushing landscape. "Because I've been holding this together for 2 days, and if someone is kind to me right now, I'm going to fall apart, and I cannot afford to fall apart until I'm home." Silence. Then Cale did something she didn't expect. He reached over and took her hand, not romantically, not with any of the performance of it, just his hand covering hers on the seat, solid and warm and entirely certain, the way he did everything. "You can fall apart on the plane," he said. "I won't tell anyone." Isla looked down at their hands. She didn't fall apart, but something in her chest loosened quietly, like a knot that had been pulled tight for 14 months finally finding a fraction of slack. "Thank you," she said, very quietly. He didn't say "you're welcome." He didn't say anything, but he didn't let go of her hand either. The plane was small, private, and warmer than anything Isla had felt in days. She was asleep within 20 minutes, which she hadn't intended and would have been embarrassed about if she'd been awake to know it. She woke to gray London light through the window and the disorienting softness of a blanket she didn't remember having. Her head was against the window. Someone had put a pillow between her cheek and the cold glass. Cale was across the aisle, awake, reviewing papers. He looked up when she stirred. "We land in 40 minutes, he said. Isla sat up, straightened her ruined dress, tried to reassemble herself into someone competent. "You should have woken me. You needed to sleep." "I didn't mean to." "Isla." His voice was patient in the particular way of someone who was not naturally patient but was choosing it. "Stop apologizing for being human." She looked at him, at this man who had walked her out of a room full of armed criminals, who had held her hand in a car at 4 a.m. without making it mean anything complicated, who had put a pillow between her face and a cold window while she slept. "Who are you?" she asked. It was what he'd asked her 2 days ago in a different life. Something moved in his expression. "You know what I am." "I know what you do. That's not the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he agreed. "It's not." "The man who sent me a book in the middle of the night," she said. "The man who told Petrov I won when he could have said nothing, who covered me with a blanket on a plane." She held his gaze. "That man is not what people say you are. Say I'm dangerous. You are dangerous. Then you're also something else." She didn't look away. "I haven't figured out the word for it yet." Plane began its descent. London emerged through the cloud below them, gray and familiar in hers. Cale looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "When your probate hearing is finished, when your stepfather has been dealt with and your mother's company is yours, when all of that is done, yes, I'd like to take you to dinner." A pause. An actual dinner, not a transaction, not research, not a game. Isla felt something warm and terrifying move through her. "That sounds personal," she said. "Yes," he said. "It does. You said you don't do personal." "I said I didn't." His eyes were steady on hers. "You made me a liar somewhere between the Dostoevsky and the ice shelf data." She laughed, actually laughed, surprised out of her, and watched something in his face shift at the sound of it, like it was something he wanted to keep. "Dinner," she said. After, he agreed. The hearing was on March 15th. Marcus had hired 3 lawyers and a great deal of confidence. He had not accounted for the fact that his stepdaughter had spent 14 months quietly, methodically, building a case that his own lawyers hadn't anticipated. He also had not accounted for the quiet appearance, in the gallery, of a dark-haired man in a suit who sat without expression and watched the proceedings with the particular attention of someone who had arranged several things behind the scenes that Marcus would never be able to trace. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Isla walked out with everything. Her mother's company, the properties, the accounts, every asset Alina Voss had spent her life building. She stood on the courthouse steps in the gray March cold and breathed. Her phone buzzed. "Well done." Casey typed back, "Were you in the gallery? I don't know what you're talking about." "Cale, congratulations, Isla. Your mother would be proud." She stood there for a long moment, the city moving around her, holding her phone. Then she typed, "About that dinner." His response came immediately, which told her everything. "Tonight, 8 p.m. I'll send the address. One condition," she typed back, "name it, somewhere warm. I've had enough of the cold." A pause, then done. "And Isla, wear something you chose yourself this time." She smiled so wide that the lawyer beside her gave her a slightly alarmed look. The restaurant was warm, candlelit, quiet. A corner table that Kale was already at when she arrived, standing when he saw her, which was such a simple thing and somehow the thing that undid her most completely. She was wearing deep green. Something she'd chosen herself from her own wardrobe in her own apartment because she was home and everything was hers again. "You look," he stopped, seemed to decide something. "You look like yourself. Is that a compliment? It's the best one I know how to give." They sat, ordered. The conversation moved the way it had in Iceland, easy and sharp and slightly combative in the way of two people who are too evenly matched to let things go soft. Over dessert, Isla said, "You arranged something for the hearing." Marcus's lead lawyer withdrew the morning of last-minute conflict of interest. She tilted her head. That was a very specific conflict of interest to develop overnight. People discover their ethics at unexpected times. Kale, he looked at her over his glass. Your mother spent 20 years building something. Your stepfather spent 14 months trying to steal it. A pause. I find that kind of thing offensive. So you intervened. I made a phone call. That's not what we agreed. We agreed on a transaction. The transaction is complete. His voice was quiet. This is separate. This is me personally finding your stepfather offensive and doing something about it. Isla looked at him. At the man who had walked her out of Iceland, covered her with a blanket, and then quietly dismantled her stepfather's legal strategy from a distance because he found injustice offensive. "Going to be very complicated," she said, almost certainly. "I have a company to run. A real one. I don't have time for complicated. I run an empire," he said. "I have less time than you, and yet here I am." Set down his glass, looked at her with those dark eyes that had dismissed her once in a warehouse in Iceland and hadn't been able to look away since. "Because you knelt on a stone floor like it was a throne," he said. "Because you asked for Dostoevsky in a hostage situation. Because you walked into the most dangerous room in the world and looked for the pressure points instead of the exits." He paused. "Because you told me you were going to make me choose you, and then you did it without ever once trying to be anything other than exactly what you are." Candle between them flickered. "I chose you too," Isla said quietly. "In Iceland, not just tactically. I know. That's terrifying. I know that too." He reached across the table and his hand covered hers, the same way it had in a car at 4 a.m. on a frozen road, solid and certain and unhurried. "We can be terrified together if it helps." Isla turned her hand over beneath his. "My mother used to say," she said quietly, "that the best partnerships are the ones where both people are slightly afraid of what they've found." "Woman, wisest." She looked at him. "I think she would have liked you. I think she would have found me useful and slightly dangerous." That's exactly what she liked in people. Kale smiled, the real one, the rare one, the one that changed his entire face. The one that she was already certain very few people had ever seen and that she intended, quietly and without making a transaction of it, to keep seeing for a very long time. "So," he said, "what happens next?" Isla looked at this man who was dangerous and complicated, and had sent her a book in the dark and held her hand without making it a performance, and had apparently found her stepfather's behavior offensive enough to personally dismantle. "Next," she said, "I run my company, you run your empire, and occasionally when the world isn't ending, we have dinner somewhere warm." That's a very practical arrangement, a very practical person. "You knelt on a stone floor in a torn dress to win over a man everyone called a monster," he said. "You're the least practical person I've ever met. I prefer the word strategic." "Of course you do." His thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand, and Isla thought about her mother, who had built everything from nothing and left it to her daughter with the quiet confidence that she would know what to do with it. She thought she was beginning to understand what that meant, not just the company. Not just the assets and the accounts and the Arctic shipping routes, but this too. The terrifying, inconvenient, entirely unplanned thing that had started on a stone floor in Iceland and showed no signs of being controllable. Her mother had always said the best things never were.